Thanks for staying on. Reporting continues now here on In Focus. A High Court ruling has found that anti-apartheid activist Dr Neil Aggett didn't commit suicide while in custody but was killed by the Special Branch Police. This follows a lengthy inquest looking into the circumstances of Aggett's death, who was found hanging in a jail cell at the John Vorster Square in Johannesburg in 1982. Can this ruling be the catalyst needed to speed up investigations and prosecutions of apartheid-era crimes? Here to unpack this, I'm joined by legal expert Adv Romeo Nthambeleni, SAFTU General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi, the Aggett Family Attorney Adv Moray Hathorn, as well as Dr Neil Aggett's partner Dr Liz FLoyd. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. Adv Moray, let me begin with you. Close to 2 years now of a court journey. Does this firstly reveal the important information that is needed to set in motion the various avenues for prosecution of the Security Branch Police linked to the killing of Dr Neil Aggett? Advocate Hathorn? All right, I think we've lost him there on the line. We'll try and establish that connection with him in just a moment. Let me go to you then, Advocate Romeo Nthambeleni. Families and victims of the apartheid-era crimes want the NPA to prosecute perpetrators or suspects in the murder of Neil Aggett and other cases in particular with immediate effect and with urgency before they die. Is this something that is possible? And what will it take to get us to that point? And does, for example, the outcomes of this particular court case help us to speed up this particular process?
Yeah, thank you very much, and good evening to you and the viewers and my fellow panelists as well. If there is a will from the government, Thabo, there's nothing impossible. I think this is actually long overdue. The case that opened the can of worms was that one of Timol, and we could see from there that these things are possible, and they were supposed to be done a long time ago, because families were not actually finding closure. And as in law, when we say that justice delayed is justice denied, this is precisely the case. And this was supposed to be done a long time ago, and the NPA has a unit that apparently that is actually dealing with this matter to expedite these matters, and it shows you that this entire process, the country has not found healing since the so-called Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which there was no truth of any nature in it whatsoever. Because if there was truth, these families that we are talking about, either the Craddock four family and the Timol family and the current matter that we are talking about, they should have found closure a long time ago. So this is a matter of serious urgency now.
Yeah. So, I mean, what you're raising here is this question of an adopted strategy by the NPA to create a dedicated and sustainable capacity to investigate and prosecute apartheid-era crimes. And apparently there are about 25 or so investigators who are looking into these particular matters. I mean, the fact that it is dedicated and has got some kind of resources to sustain it means that this is a group of people who should not have a split focus with all the other cases that the NPA has got to deal with. These are individuals who just should be looking at these TRC cases and ensuring that they are being prosecuted and they're being investigated properly. So why would civil society and families believe that these cases are deliberately being suppressed?
Yeah, because of the length of time and the period that it has taken, Thabo, to actually get to where we are now today, since the so-called Truth and Reconciliation Commission to where we are today, and these families want closure. We are talking about families with real people that they have actually lost. So to actually say to them that there's a team that is looking at this doesn't give them comfort and sanity when they know that these matters have been dragging for the longest of time. So the moment we start seeing these matters being brought to court and perpetrators being brought to book, then we can start to say that the proof of the eating, the pudding is in the eating. Then we can see that there is delivery for these families that have suffered injustice during the period of apartheid and also still continue to suffer injustice today in what is supposed to be a democracy in South Africa.
Yeah. Dr. Liz FLoyd also joining us on the line. Dr. Liz, the courts have set aside a prior judgment of the inquest into the death of Dr. Neil Aggett. Now, this new court saying the next phase is to investigate the murder, investigate the cover-up, place pressure on these hawks and the NPA and make sure that they deliver. Do you believe they will deliver quickly enough?
I think the top priority for the NPA is, in fact, to reopen the other inquests. There are a large number of people who were killed by the security police in the 1980s, many who disappeared, and there were a series of assassinations. The difficulty with following up with criminal charges is that almost all the security police who were involved in torturing and assassination during that period have died. A very few of them have apologized for what they did, and most of them didn't go to the TRC to apply for amnesty. So the deal with the TRC was, if you give the truth, you are considered for amnesty. So most of them decided to ignore it. And they therefore should have been charged for their crimes when they were alive. So I think with the many torturers of Neil Aggett, there's one who's alive, and his chief torturer, in fact, died about 5 days before the Minister of Justice announced that the NPA would go ahead with Aggett inquest. So it's a bit late to hold people accountable, but I think we're seeing the after effects of it, where we now have a culture of people not accounting for what they do. And I'm concerned that the failure to follow up on these cases has contributed to the current environment where if you have powerful access, you don't have to account for what you've done. So it's a little bit late. The NPA has had a unit which has been looking for the remains of people who were killed by the security police. And there is some progress in discovering remains and returning them to the family. I've had quite a lot of contact with the other detainees who gave evidence in the Aggett inquest. And we're not looking for revenge. I think we are insisting on accountability, and it's not just the security police themselves. It was the political leader that authorized everything that they did. And just by the way, we don't see ourselves as victims. Yeah. We were fighting for freedom, and all of us continued after detention. Yeah. And as some of us say, by the way, we won.
Yeah. Now, since the Timor case, of course, literally opened a can of worms in this particular matter, Dr. Liz, the NPA made this commitment to say, well, we will have this dedicated strategy and dedicated team, and they've set these people up. What have they done since then? What are you hearing from the other detainees and the other families that are seeking justice?
I don't know all the families. There's the COSAS 4 inquest has opened. The Craddock 4 families are very distressed. There's something coming up with the Hathorn family. I don't have all the details. I think the legal team's working on it, but just not to underestimate what it took. Extensive investigations led by Frank Button, a strong legal team led by Howard Barney with Weber Wenzel and funded by the Human Rights Foundation. The NPA gave support, and the detainees were amazing in giving very credible evidence. And the problem is that with that kind of detail of torture, people re-experienced the distress and the emotions of the original experience. So they were quite generous and did it to contribute to getting to the bottom of Neil's death.
All right, let's take a break. We'll continue in a moment. We'll get reaction from Zwelinzima Vavi, Secretary General of SAFTU, as well as Adv Moray Hathorn, who will be joining us again, making a reconnection there with us on the line. Stay live tonight and in focus. Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405. Conversation continues. We have with us on the line Dr. Liz FLoyd, partner to Dr. Neil Aggett. We've got Zwelinzima Vavi of SAFTU, Adv Romeo Nthambeleni, and still trying to connect Adv Moray Hathorn. But Dr. Vavi, let me come to you. There is a call for this Presidential Commission of Inquiry, not to reopen investigations, but to answer very important questions. One, why political interference occurred and in the suppression of TRC cases? 2, what decisions were made to then go ahead and suppress these cases? But 3, who was responsible for the political interference? Do you think we'll ever find answers to those questions, and what will they reveal?
Then it's a worrying proposition that we are facing here for Gamdrul. I really don't know what is behind all of this, and except to have serious conspiracy theories about why the leadership have lost appetite to fight for the justice of those that have died and sacrificed with their own lives during the struggle against apartheid. There were 71 activists, anti-apartheid activists, who were tortured to death in the apartheid cells in between around 1968, the first being Luxma Ngudle Solange, and the last one being Matisha. And right until 1990, when that was still happening, 71 of them. Neil Aggett was only a prisoner number 51 to have died in prison. And I don't recall anyone being held accountable for the death of all of those 71 activists. Now, the most astonishing and embarrassing story we now have is that the TRC actually recommended that over 300 former security officials be prosecuted for killings of countless activists in our country. 300 of them were supposed to have been prosecuted, and nothing happened. The TRC wrote a letter somehow protesting in October of 2018 to say, but why are our recommendations not being carried forward? The first one to prosecute the 300 people, and the second one to ensure that there is some kind of reparation for the victims. Nothing have happened since then. We hear the NPA now saying that there will be a dedicated team within its institution to prosecute. Frankly, we do not believe that. Why would have they set on 300 cases of people with names, 300 names, where the TRC said Mr. So-and-so and so-and-so is being accused of having done this, and he has not asked for any amnesty with us prosecuting? Why have they not acted? That's why we even looking at this latest commission, many commissions in South Africa, no results, with absolutely disbelief, and we don't believe that anybody will ever be held accountable. Why would they suddenly jump on cases of corruption when they wouldn't act against cases of such gross injustices? People were tortured here to death. If you follow the story of Neil Aggett, you will hear the brazenness, the heartlessness, the cruelty, the cold heart of the torturers of the apartheid regime. Of course, one of them died, Stephen Whitehead, died on the week that we're supposed to get the good news that finally there's a confirmation from the courts that indeed Neil Aggett didn't hang himself but was tortured to death and was probably killed. And if you hear all of the testimonies that were led in court, you will hear how he really suffered of torture. 3 hours every day, woken up at 3 o'clock every morning, and denied not just the right to sleep, but beaten, tortured, brutalized. And our leaders know that. They themselves are survivors of all of that. Why would they not act against at least against the 300 people that the TRC said they must be prosecuted? And why they have left the families in lurch of all of the 71 plus more of the people who died in detention? Why is there no action? Why is there no anger? And why suddenly, instead of us hearing prosecution, we hear that some of those tortures, at least one of them, Eugene de Kock, is getting 40,000 rands a month from our money, the survivors of that torture, and from the government. What does that tell you? Does it tell you that perhaps the people who are giving him the 40,000 have turned their backs on the victims of those apartheid cruel acts against activists, against apartheid?
Do you believe there's a secret pact of non-action, so. of forgetting, of suppression?
How would you explain what we now know? How could anybody give Eugene de Kock 40,000 rand and maintain him in some secret house? Why? Is there a deal here? Did we ever know who were amongst our leaders who worked for the other side and who are now perhaps feeling obliged to pay back to their comrades? Were there askaris in the leadership who basically are now caught in between pursuing the justice for Neil Aggett and countless others? And why would they give de Kock money and maintain him for 40,000 rands a month? Come on, there's something smelling very, very funny there.
Let's get in Advocate Moray Hathorn now, able to join us on the line. Advocate, as Zwelinzima Vavi outlined some of the gruesome details that came out of this court, of the degree and the amount of torture that Dr. Neil Aggett went through. Does this set in motion for you and the family other avenues to prosecute the security branch police? At least we know that Lieutenant Steve Whitehead has passed on, but is there a degree of willingness and energy within the family to pursue these avenues of prosecution? Advocate Hathorn? All right, we seem to have lost him again there on that line, having real challenges there coming on the line today. We'll try and get him on again. Dr. Advocate Nthambeleni, the process of prosecuting past crimes of this nature is seemingly a difficult one, because the NPA, even at some point, I heard them saying that they might not be able to prosecute all of them because of the time lapse, but also because of just the details that they would need to be successful in these prosecutions.
Yeah, you're quite correct, Tabu, in terms of the timeline and the time frames. But I agree with what Mr. Vavi was saying. That if you drag things out for the longest of time, this is what you are actually going to get ultimately. That you're going to get memory fading and the evidence that has been left. But these things have been lying in the state hands since the so-called TRC. And the question is, why was that not being prosecuted at the earlier moments when some of these people that we are talking about that had passed on were still alive? You have seen with the case of Rodriguez, it went to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and after that he actually passed away. And even if it was victory on the Timor family to finally know the truth about what really happened to him, the family could not finally get justice in terms of prosecuting and in terms of evidence that has actually faded away in terms of time. And I will agree with Mr. Vavi in what he's saying in relation to what you can see in relation to the prosecution, because the only cases that are being prosecuted are those ones that the families have taken themselves and used their own resources to actually make sure that these cases are prosecuted. But it has been said that the unit has been there, and we haven't seen any prosecution so far.
Yeah, Dr. Liz, as victims, as families, and as people who are at the forefront of pushing for these prosecutions, are the families still energized? Do they still have the energy and the resources to continue this fight?
I don't know all the families. I've had a little bit of contact with some of them, but it takes major resources. If you look at how much was done for this inquest, the reopened inquest, and also we were able to access the records from the first inquest. Now, a lot of people who disappeared or assassinated, there wasn't even an inquest at the time. So how do you gather information from 35, 40 years ago? I didn't expect this inquest to deliver as much. I wasn't expecting a lot of it because it was so many years after what had happened. And in fact, the judgment came 40 years after he died.
And is it an attitude that has been adopted to say we'll continue by any means necessary?
For the Aggett case or for the others?
For the Aggett case, but even for the others.
Well, I don't feel particularly strongly about it. The family can really make the decision. As I said, there's only one person who's still alive. A lot of these people died very young, and the ones that did make it through to the inquest were in terrible shape. They haven't done well, and in comparison, the detainees are most of us have survived and are thriving. It may be different for other families, but I doubt that there are many torturers who are still alive.
Yeah. Dr. Vavi, I mean, there are, of course, suggestions and calls for opening up more inquests in respect to apartheid-era death in detention crimes. But listening to Dr. Liz FLoyd there and the amount of resources and money that is required to pursue these cases, are they just going to be dead in the water, especially for the poor black families who might not be able to raise that amount of resources?
I think the reality is that we're going to just write this into the history books, and no one will ever be prosecuted for the death of the first one, who died in 1968, Solwandle. And the last one died in 1990, as I just said. Neil Aggett died in 1982. And even in the case of Neil Aggett, who was only 28 years when he was killed, as the good lawyer is saying, the only one person is there, frail and almost dying himself. All others have passed away. You can imagine. And the people who have been torturing people to death from 1968, where those torturers are, they're all gone. And I suspect that now we may not even find those that are listed by the TRC that should have been prosecuted, at least when they prosecuted, the TRC handed over the report to the presidents of this country. Nothing have happened. They are not being prosecuted. And do you want to tell me now that the NPA will find a reason and a stamina to prosecute the people who are accused of having stolen billions of rand as a result of the so-called State Capture Commission report? We have no confidence that the NPA have capacity or political will. It's like they have been instructed not to pursue those serious crimes against humanity. Here in South Africa, it's a shameful situation that we are facing. I mean, and how do people who should have acted sleep at night? What do they say to the family of Neil Aggett today? By the way, we must thank Neil Aggett family. They pursued this matter left, right, and center. We must thank the Foundation for Human Rights, the Neil Aggett Support Group, the Brian Sandberg, George Bezos in his grave, the Weber Wenzel attorneys, and the Yasma Suka of the TRC and the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. If it was not because of those people, we would not be here to talk about that. Finally, a judge have said that no, there was no reason for, was it Guy Peter Kotze, the magistrate, that declared that Neil Aggett hanged himself.
Yeah.
How many?
Let's leave it there because of time, unfortunately. But I appreciate you coming on, and I understand the deepness of the conversation and what you want to express. Adv Nthambeleni, I appreciate your time. Dr. Liz, thank you very much for your time. Unfortunately, that's where we leave it for tonight.